Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining in today. And it's lovely to be talking to all of you. And we are today going to, of course, discuss the future of citizenship and whether citizenship is really something that is, outdated and whether it still has any kind of relevance. So today that's an exciting topic that we are going to be talking about today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And thank you so much for joining. And let's get started with the signature tune. All right. So, really, what is the essence of what I wanted to discuss today? Let me just put forth a little context. Citizenship is something that we are born into. I mean, we really had no choice. It's pretty much like the family, you don't get to choose. Citizenship is also not something that you can choose. And we are expected to share its values, obey its constitution, and we can even, of course, give it up at some point of time. That's another option that we have. And funnily enough, if you take up citizenship of another country, in most countries, you have to take a pledge that if you have to take up arms against your citizenship by birth, that country, you are expected to be able to do that. Now, that's somewhat strange, but then reality is that today's world is really becoming completely fluid and boundaryless. Think about it. The questions I want to explore with you is that, does having citizenship make you more parochial? Because, it just makes you artificially want to claim more territory because, after all, at the end of the day, citizenship is about access to territory. It gives you access to a certain land. It allows you, and if the other country that you want to visit is in favor of what you are offering, in terms of your passport, then you get access to that territory. So it's a territorial ticket, if you will. But then there is much more to that. How do we think about crimes that go boundaryless? How do we think about currency like cryptocurrency? How do we think about relationships which get formed online? Work is, any case, boundaryless. And of course, you also have digital nomads who are really not traveling, who are working out of multiple countries and multiple territories. So I'm joined by a set of friends here. Welcome, Madhavan, Dr. Billa,
Hello.
and all the listeners. So, what do you think, Madhavan? What is the future of citizenship? Is it even relevant today?
Well, it's a good question because, Vijit, as we speak, there is turmoil in Afghanistan. The lasting images of this week include of literally people, uh, running on the tarmac in the Kabul airport, trying to catch a flight as if it was a Bombay local train or Mumbai local train. It's very symbolic of how people may do not want to stay in the land even if it is that of their ancestors. So this idea of the homeland based on ancestry is, for several reasons, being questioned now. One is, of course, the rise of globalization in the economy, the technology, especially the internet, that is bringing people closer and closer, and above all, better lifestyles. But it is being enabled also by revolutions in travel, because air travel is becoming more and more affordable. But the idea is to see, can the world move to a situation where, on the one hand, people can migrate the way they want to, on the other hand, whether the concept of citizenship itself be revisited. So, interestingly, for instance, let's jump into what is happening right now. Some countries offer dual citizenship. There is Antigua, Dominica, even Austria, and even Turkey, I understand, offers citizenship, often linked to investments made in the country. But the fact that they do is interesting. Like offshore banking, it has become offshore citizenship. Meanwhile, Estonia offers e-residency to enable, let's say, businesses in UK or even freelancers in the UK, the advantages of accessing a EU market by giving them access through a digital citizenship that lets them avail themselves of even public services, not just private services. A lot of it is built around business, but as more and more work on which you have chronicled a lot, Abhijit, which is about virtual working or working with the brains and remote working happens, I think increasingly the economics and technology come together, and eventually, as I see it, increasingly politics will be affected. Of course, security reasons and historical reasons and cultural reasons will stand in the way, but I see that more and more countries will be more liberal in citizenship, and particularly because this is where I stick my neck out. Increasingly, the way is that citizenship is not based on the idea of the ancient homeland or your forefathers' land, but of constitutionally administered territories. So, which basically means that if you are abiding by the law of the land and follow some rules, citizenship can be granted. And some countries don't mind even somebody being a citizen of another country at the same time, because this whole business of loyalty and is based on feudal ideas of conflict. So, as the world becomes more and more cooperative, citizenship will also change, and today's economics could be tomorrow's politics.
So, Madhavan, thanks a lot. I mean, really, you make three interesting conversation points. And those of you who are joining in today for the first time, you can just simply tap the logo and you get a 40-second clip of something interesting that you may have noticed. I'm just going to simply summarize what a couple of things that Madhavan said. So we started today by exploring the whole notion of citizenship, if it's relevant today, because all it means is access to a certain territory. And yet, at the same time, we see that there are people who there are countries which offer citizenship if you make an investment. There are countries like Estonia which are making it possible for you to, anybody. There are tons and tons of Indian companies which are, located there in Estonia. In fact, at one point of time, I also thought of setting up a unit in Estonia because it gives you access to the European market, and you can have the opportunity to work there. It's a e-residency, which is kind of like a gray zone, if you will. So that's there. And then this whole notion of homeland can be there are some places which offer you dual citizenship. So even a country like Bangladesh offers you dual citizenship. You can have the citizenship of the country of birth or your parents. You can do that. There was the person of Indian origin. So if you look at it, I mean, there seems to be this whole notion of multiple identities. So in that situation, which are facing talent shortages, as Gautam Ghosh says, countries which are facing talent shortages offer citizenship to others due to demographic change. And we will see more and more of that. Even an insular country like Japan is today offering, citizenship on a fast track to healthcare workers because of the sheer skew of, people who are living in a certain age group. Also, Mrinal wanted to ask a question. How do you define a citizen versus a refugee versus a non-state actor? So, Dr. Billa, if you want to have a go at it, please unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and let's have a go at that. Dr. Billa, you have to unmute yourself with the blue button. In the meanwhile, Madhavan, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, actually, the point to remember is, let me address Mrinal Khan's question about non-state actors and refugees. Honestly, Mrinal, this circle is about the future of citizenship. I think the whole idea is to see which are the trend-setting nations and how viable we are and why we are getting there. And Abhijit has already spoken about talent. As increasingly talent, we all know that money, 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 it's a rich man's world, and therefore businesses, even US citizenship is available if you're ready to invest a certain amount of money. But the interesting part is, with talent becoming important, even those who do not really have Papa's money can actually become, either by travel or by e-residency, increasingly closer to citizenship. For instance, Estonia's e-citizenship, e-residency is not citizenship, but it offers a lot of advantages which, let's say, a European citizen would have. So we've come one step closer, and as I see it, I'll come back to your question on citizen as a refugee versus non-state actors. Refugees are only refugees. There are security issues as well as humanitarian issues linked to that, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. But as more and more countries move away from the idea of ethnicity or religion as a benchmark of citizenship, and more towards, let's say, talent or law abiding nature, in that case, the old notions of citizenship are going away. But obstacles remain. But the whole purpose of futurism, as we discuss, is to say what is and what should and likely define citizenship of the future. And as we see it, it will be increasingly talent and your uh, human qualities rather than ethnicity. So we are talking about a decline of ethnicity. It's a controversial issue because, as we know, Turkish people in Germany are being questioned that way. But the whole idea is the world is also discussing certain other things in a way that no longer uses simplistic yardsticks. So that is what this show is trying to do. And non-state actor is often used only for people like uh, terrorists and all that. So I think we'll keep it out of this kind of a discussion today, because that's basically relying on the exceptional characters, whereas we are focusing on where the world is moving as a rule.
So,
So
Madhavan, if you look at the future, when I look at that, I mean, there was a point of time when I look at my grandfather's generation, for him, moving out of the particular village where he was working was a real big deal. And he broke that norm by, those days it used to be called Kalapani. If you moved out of India, crossed the seas and went into another country, leave alone a citizenship, just the act of moving out or leaving the territory was considered to be sacrilege. And then, of course, you had a situation where in my father's generation, it was moving outside of the state. So the boundary actually expanded, and moving outside the state became possible and became mainstream. Today, so many people go to study there and then stay on to in a different country to acquire citizenship. I guess the question I would throw open for debate is it that for the rich people, whether it's by investment, are there going to be two categories? So either the rich can change their citizenship on will, or is it possible that fugitives can do it too? Because, cybercrime actually is boundaryless any which way, because you can have the server in one country, the data taken in another country, and the theft of the credit card can be in another country, stored on the darknet, which in itself is another sort of layer altogether. So, in many ways, this whole notion of rigid human boundaries is in itself becoming irrelevant. So, going forward, as Madhavan rightly said, I would agree with that. That talent is going to drive the whole notion of what it means to be a citizen. So it's going to be your talent, and I think there are many. The other piece to think about is there are many problems. For example, the pandemic is creating problems which needs to be solved regardless of citizenship. Humanitarian issues need to be solved regardless of citizenship, whether it's a crisis, a refugee crisis, because when there are times during the Bangladesh liberation, there was a point of time when so many people moved into India and they were given the opportunity. Sometimes, people move into another country and spend years together, for work. So economics always trumps political reasons is my
exactly.
hypothesis. It will
Abhijit,
always
let me
happen.
give you an interesting, fascinating example. P.G. Wodehouse was considered to be the epitome of what is called English humor or British humor. But guess what? He became an American citizen. I think the economic factors, especially taxation, played a major role. And that's very ironically symbolic of what the future of citizenship is. And M.F. Hussein died as a Qatari citizen, as a citizen of Qatar, after being born and Indian and living in India and being acclaimed in India with the one of the highest civilian honors. MK here chips in with a lot of usual political discourse about excessive taxation, alienation of minorities. MK, I'm afraid you're getting too many wires mixed up there. I think the important point is choice to people, and whether the world is moving towards some increased choice scenario based on the rule of law, and the answer is yes. And that is where the future of citizenship is going. Some countries will lead the others, whether it is Sweden or Estonia. And not obviously, economics will continue to play an important role. There will be a protectionism of sorts. The important thing to note, especially after what Abhijit said about his grandfather, is that our default option has moved increasingly from suspicion and xenophobia to an increasing embracing of rationality as a human condition, in which increasingly parochial tendencies are less. But obviously, it's a question of looking at the half empty or half full glass. The purpose of futurism is to look at the direction in which 100 years ago nobody would have even imagined something called e-residency. It exists. Inter-country couples. I just saw a website called Expatica, which talks about wife and husband from one and another country, and their whole idea of citizenship is changing. Okay.
So if you think about, what Dilip raises an interesting question that are refugees a recruitment channel for countries with a declining population? The answer is actually that, when you think about the talent pool, if the refugees come with a certain kind of talent, I think people have no problem bringing them in, especially if the local population does not want to do that job. I remember seeing this situation in UK sometime back when, outside a Starbucks, there was a picket because they said they are employing, people from other countries. These were primarily East European workers who were there. And the owner of that Starbucks outlet stepped out and said, well, if any British citizen is willing to take up the job, I'm willing to offer the jobs right now. And funnily enough, nobody stepped in. And so,
Thank you.
after some time,
Thank you,
people
Abhijit.
went off.
Thank you, Abhijit, for saying that, because let me bring in a scientific fact here, which is that it's not just a question of citizenship with welfare benefits that keeps people away from some of the jobs. The other issue is aging. Apart from the war for talent and the arrival of the internet, there is also the fact that advanced countries have aging populations, and increasingly Japan is going that way, even China is going that way, and believe it or not, India as well, because after the Uttar Pradesh government recently passed a population control bill, people have been saying UP is behind the curve because in some parts of India, the birth rates have declined already or begun declining, and therefore, in less than 10 years from now, India might have its own aging issue, in which case migrants become more and more important and citizenship becomes more and more liberal. So what we are trying to do today is to guess the future 10 or 15 years ago from now, and you will find that some of the obstacles might suddenly go away. Let me take you back to 1989 when India was a controlled economy, and 91 dramatically things changed. What if citizenship goes through a similar framework? And that's where I think it is going. European citizenship will become increasingly easier. Maybe if you're a refugee, humanitarian ground helps. If you're a menial worker, maybe the demand and supply work in your favor. And maybe if you're talented or if you have some money, increasingly the barriers will become less and less to citizenship.
So, what is really, what we are looking at is we are looking at a world where the sands are shifting from just birth. It is sort of moved to the political scenario where, you can have multiple citizenships provided the countries are not at war with each other, because then it raises certain kinds of questions. It gives you access, but it's a two-layered access. In some cases, just having that citizenship gives you unfettered access to a particular country or a region or many countries. In some cases, despite the citizenship, despite there being an agreement you can travel, you may have a ticket, but you still need a visa. So it's a two-tiered sort of filter for citizenship. So there are countries where there is a two-tier citizenship model, which is there, not just dual citizenship. That, of course, exists. But I also think that there are going to be more and more the world as the demographics change, as connectivity increases, and of course by the fact that we are also going to Mars, in an interplanetary system, which is certainly going to be possible in the next 10 years. It is going to be that, who will have what kind of citizenship would that be? Would it be of Mars? Would that be a separate, passport? Or will we take the passport of the country of birth or what we've acquired over a span of time? And we sort of take that same thing into Mars and have the same territories divided there.
Oh,
So
that
that
sounds very
raises an interesting
futuristic.
question.
Yeah, but it's let's bring you down to earth, Abhijit. The point is that even Earth could do with some technological leaps, and it is. So, for instance, Hyperloop technology makes things easier. Air travel is becoming cheaper not just because of the internet and better inventory planning, but also because a cheaper material and more innovation is taking place in the design of aircraft itself. And above all, countries that used to have oil, like the United Arab Emirates, are increasingly embracing talent, because as oil dries up and climate change needs to be managed, attracting talent becomes important. So that is a very important point. The other thing is that, citizenship as a psychological idea is changing. And let me also mention that the WTO was formed in 1995, and I remember in Marrakesh, India placed on agenda something called the movement of natural persons, because Indian talent became so important that it became a trade issue. Now, H-1B visa quotas are a big issue in the US economy. And so, therefore, as talent becomes a trade issue, even in regulation and international economic, consultations and what is called multilateralism, more and more citizenship-oriented innovations will take place across the planet.
So there is also this whole question that Dilip Anjaria raises that, will we see e-residency evolving into a e-citizenship for a union of geographically distant countries? Potentially, yes, because I think, the world is going to get governed a lot more by talent. And the challenge of talent is that if you need a plumber, for example, regardless of blue collar, white collar, gray color, whatever color you're talking about, if you need that particular skill, you're willing to go to any length to get that. In the same way, organizations have had to make those kind of choices that you pay people. The expatriate model really evolved as a talent model where you bypass citizenship challenges. So there are fast track citizenship issues in all of that. So I remember when I went to US to work on a particular fast track green card, it was made available to me because of a special set of factors which they take into account, the talent combination. So those are going to be factors that are increasingly going to be much bigger as the world ages. You will see citizenship of some of the African countries becoming precious because it's going to allow you to get talent from some of the younger countries. India is going to probably retain its own advantage of English speaking, talent, which is therefore globally employable. That's one of the pieces, despite a crumbling education system. I think I anticipate that as a byproduct of citizenship going global, you will need to make education and talent development also global, without which citizenship is never going to survive just by
Okay,
itself.
Abhijit, let me take your focus a little away, but to amplify your point, Georgia, which is part of the former Soviet Union, has lots of Indian Sikhs and Punjabis as farmers there because they have lots of farmland. So talent need not just be digital and highly,
No, no, talent
computer
is anything. I
oriented.
mean, even the person
Talent is
who's
anything. Yeah.
anything, any
And
skill which is in demand, which creates value, is talent.
Or let me
So,
put it another way, even if citizenship itself doesn't become more fungible, access to anywhere, travel on long-term visas or even residencies will become easier. So even for retirement, we know that richer countries, like Germany, for instance, have people going and living in places like Uruguay. So you would have not have imagined it 100 years ago, but it's happening. So as Indians become richer, they might want to settle anywhere. Where Indians are buying houses in Dubai, or maybe for vanity, maybe for investment, but that's also an option. So the point is, as technology, economy, and attitudes change, both residency and citizenship will become increasingly liberal. But just
so
like what
are
happened with
these interchangeable? Madhavan, do you think citizenship and the skills element that you talk about, nationality, is that going to be interchangeable at some point of time?
let me use the word fungible. I think I would rather use a simple word like flexible. More and more countries will embrace flexibility and build it into their framework, because
Right.
having a simple thumb rule will increasingly become counterproductive to countries. For instance, Germany, for instance,